the deeper or the more someone knows you, the more likelihood of the right gift. And the flip side, the more deeply you know someone, the more likely that you will give the right gift, right? Now, we were talking about this, kind of joking in the first service and saying, everybody has gotten socks for Christmas. And usually either it's a stocking stuffer, or it's somebody who doesn't know you that well, and it's a safe gift, right? Because everybody needs socks. I remember, it's funny how you change as you get older. It's like when I first used to get socks, they'd be like, somebody gave me socks. Now it's like, somebody gave me socks. I need them now, that type of thing. But it's a free gift, and it's that type of thing we give when we don't know someone that well usually. Not a lot of thought going into the gift. And that brings us into the whole thing with the wise men, or the magi, as we know. They are a focal point of the Christmas story, aren't they? As a matter of fact, they are the ones that are traditionally, we see as the inspiration of why we give each other gifts at Christmas. It all comes down to these wise men giving gifts. Here's the amazing thing, though, of these wise men, or these magi. A Jewish Messiah in a Jewish culture. God comes into that context, into the world, and yet this thing of giving the right gifts doesn't come out of the Jewish arena at all. It comes from these guys who, as we would understand them, probably from the border of Iran, Iraq, that area where the Medes priest caste was out there, traveling hundreds of miles from outside the Jewish nation, from outside the Jewish culture, in all of this. And here they are, and they manage to give just the right gifts. Wow. Well, we can think of somebody next to them, and here these guys come from outside. They were seeking this Messiah from various sources with all their minds and hearts and wills. And so in they come, and they actually have a better handle on the Jewish Messiah than the priests did of the Jewish culture. They had a better sense of the timing than the scribes. They had a better sense of where he would be born than the Jewish king did. Here they are, bringing the right gifts. And as I tried this was really fun, because I started out with, here's a trick question. And so nobody would answer in the first service, but how many gifts did the wise men bring? 3? Is that okay? Well, that's I was looking for a number. 3. Okay, we're saying 3. And that's the way we normally think, but traditionally think that way in 3. But in fact, the wise men brought 4 gifts. And as a matter of fact, the gift that we don't recognize as a gift was the most important gift of all, because it set the context of everything else. And you know what that gift was? Well, I'm not going to tell you. Basically, we'll hit it before we get all the way through here. But the bottom line with all of these gifts, and we're going to just take a few minutes to unwrap their gifts and learn the illustration here, that it's because they knew deeply who they were giving to that they were able to give just the right gifts, even weird gifts to give to a baby. They were just really strange. So let's take a look at what they give. And since, like I said, we're actually not starting at gift number 1, we're starting at gift number 2, which was gold. Gold. Gift number 2 was gold, and it was a gift that you would give to a king. Now, here's the thing with this, too, is not only did they give gifts that were showed an understanding and touched the life of the Christ child in his position, but also in time. The gold was given for Christ the King. He was presently that. They gave a gift that acknowledged who he was at the time. He was born the King of Kings. Now, in ancient times, it wasn't just that you gave gold to a king, it was expected. You were coming to see the King of men, so you were giving him the King of metals. They were expected to be giving something of gold. So in his present position, his present state, he was a king. They brought him the gold for king. The next one is frankincense, which is pretty interesting, because other than the little perfumey things that sometimes we burn, this is just what really is frankincense, and what did it say about a gift for this Christ child? Well, we'll start with this. It's of course, it's a tree resin. It comes from, of all things, the frankincense tree. And it is very, very expensive stuff. If you get this in its really pure form, it sells for over $100 an ounce. Basically, the best comes from Oman, on the coastal area. And even today, they still do it in pretty much the same way. It grows in these frankincense trees along the craggy coastline, the cliffs and all such. And these collectors will go up to the trees. It's kind of like the maple syrup thing, really. They nick the tree, they collect it drop by drop, and they leave however they collect it over a period of 10 days. And then this milky white sap will come out, and then they'll dry it completely, and then the resin gets used in different things, And here's something to know, that if it's a really high quality, the highest quality actually be a clear resin. But if it's lower the quality, it's kind of like a muddy brown. So you'll know if you get frankincense or you buy it for Christmas or something, the more brown it is, the lower the quality it is. And as a matter of fact, they have their own religious and other things they do in places like Oman with this tree resin frankincense. So it is very, very rare and hard for Westerners to get the real high-grade stuff. They tend to be using it there themselves. So here they are. In the Jewish culture, they have this use of frankincense. Now, in other cultures, like in Oman, it's used for 2 or 3 different things. But in the Jewish culture, frankincense is only reserved for one purpose only. It is used in relation to honoring God. It's burnt in the temple. It makes a smoke. I think those of us who were brought up Catholic have a connection or an understanding with this. How many times we might have sat in there and they did the thing and the smoke is rising. And actually, it's kind of an interesting thing, because it is actually a direct correlation to how the Jews used it. The idea of the smoke is all the prayers and all the pleas of the people of God are going up in the smoke to heaven. That's kind of the symbolic thing going on. So this smoke, this frankincense, is a priest gift. It is something you give to somebody in a religious situation. Whoa, this is kind of interesting. There's this baby born in a manger, and the first gift is for a king, and now the second gift is dealing with a priest, and the frankincense actually touches on the child's past, starting there. His past in what way? Philippians 2, 6, and 7. For who, this is talking about Christ, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. Christ was God before time began. He is the God of eternity past. And so they were acknowledging where he came from. This is God come to earth. That was his. But yet he comes, and now he has emptied himself of his godliness to become a servant, relying on the Father's godliness. So there was some deep understanding from this frankincense in that way. Some pretty deep stuff going on. And then this frankincense also touched the Christ child's future. And we go back in the Old Testament. Of course, this is happening in the Old Testament situation. Leviticus 2:1. When anyone offers a grain offering to the Lord, his offering shall be fine flour. He shall pour oil on it and put frankincense on it. It was also tied in with offering, and especially this thing called a grain offering, which is also known as the first fruits offering. The first fruits offering. What could they be alluding to in this first fruits offering? 1 Corinthians 15:20. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. the frankincense was a direct correlation to this, that this Christ child who was a king and had a priestly role would be a sacrifice, and in that sacrifice he would be the first fruits of something. In that first fruits of something was the resurrection itself. All of this deep, deep stuff coming from the gifts that were being shared. Frankincense was a weird gift to give a baby. But in this case, it was the perfect gift. It was the most appropriate gift. How did they manage that? Knowing deeply who is receiving the gift. Knowing deeply the person to whom you are giving. And along comes the fourth gift, myrrh. Well, myrrh is actually even more profound than the frankincense. Once again, an expensive perfume thing going on. It was a fragrance. It was expensive. Had some really neat purposes. It was a beauty product, by the way, for one thing. For the king, it was required that if the concubines were to be brought to the king, that they would first be soaked in a bath of myrrh before they would go. So it was a beauty product. It was a medical product. It was an antiseptic, an antispasmodic. It did, just a whole list of things that it would do. So it had all these practical purposes, but it's when we get to the spiritual context of it that it really starts to get interesting. Start with this, Psalms 45, 7 and 8. It's talking about the righteous before the Lord. You love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness above your fellows. Your robes are fragrant with myrrh and aloes and cassia. In this case, it is actually the fragrance of God. In a very symbolic, very literal way, myrrh was the fragrance of God. Once again, myrrh is a weird thing to give a baby. But to this baby, it was extremely appropriate. It reflected God. The other things for myrrh in the medicinal side, something interesting. Myrrh was the morphine of its day. It was the morphine. It was the painkiller. It would be mixed with wine, and that was the strongest painkiller that they had, medicinally speaking. Interesting enough, myrrh crosses paths with Christ's experience on earth. Mark 15, 22 and 23 says this, and they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. And there they offered him wine mingled with myrrh, but he did not take it. It was routine to offer this drink to those being crucified. It was this painkiller thing, and it wasn't really given for humanitarian reasons, though. The Romans would offer this to those crucified because it would prolong the crucifixion. You would last longer on the cross with this painkiller. So not only when we look at this, not only did this myrrh acknowledge Christ in a God context, it told us why he was here. And it told us how he would sacrifice himself. It signified all of that. And then, of course, there's the big implication from this, John 19, 38 through 40. After this, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him leave. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus also, who had at first come to him by night, came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds weight. They took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen clothes with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Here we are, these guys, we're talking both ends of Jesus' life. Here he is as a baby just coming into the world, and they're giving gifts that talk about how he's going to leave the world in this case. And here was one of the great signs of prophecy, one of the proofs that the Messiah was actually the Messiah. One of those weird things that you couldn't explain until you saw it happen. This guy would be a poor man. He would live as a poor man. He would not have a place to lay his head. He would not own his own home. And yet somehow he's going to get buried as a rich man. And he's going to get buried in a rich man's way, because myrrh was not cheap. And I doubt if every Jewish person could afford this in burial, and especially this 100 pounds worth. But yet it happens, a sign that this guy, this Messiah, was who he said he was. So there they are. But the gifts given before any of it happens, the gifts of things that are deep and hidden, even from the disciples themselves, they didn't realize how this would come down. The myrrh and the frankincense were signs or looked forward to the resurrection of Christ. Wow. Before anyone else, even Mary, really knew. 3 gifts honored Christ's divinity, yet acknowledged his mortality. They touched his past, they touched his present, they touched his future. The gifts were perfect because these folks understood the person to whom they were giving them. They understood. That's how the right gift is given. We know the person to whom we are giving. It's the same now if we move to another paradigm of giving, and that's what Christ gave to us. Christ knows us better than we know ourselves. Christ knew we were walking in darkness, so he came as a light. He knew that we were hopeless in the eternal scheme of things, so he came to redeem us from that hopelessness. He knew we couldn't save ourselves, so he came to save us. He knew. Romans 5 verse 6 says, while we were still weak, while we were still all those things, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. Jesus came. He knew us so well, he came at the right time with the right gift in the right way, doing the right thing. That's what you can do when you know who you're giving to. Leads to a big question. Here it comes. Get ready. What about our gift to Christ? What about our gift to Christ? Going back to the Magi, we'll go back to the human side of giving gifts. We said the number 2 was the goal, so what was the number 1? Matthew 2:11. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him his gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. See, the first gift was the worship. You know, we have that legacy. We know we have that we give gifts that came from the wise men. But do you realize that the way we worship also came from the wise men? Is that the early church very quickly adopted the idea of kneeling in prayer, or even more so, commonplace back then, laying prostrate, just laying out before the Lord. That comes from the Magi as well. That's part of their legacy to us. The first worshipers of Jesus. We see why it's the most important gift now, is that that's at the context for everything else. The gold didn't mean anything until they had acknowledged who they were giving the gold to, who they were giving the myrrh to. The first gift turns out to be the most important of all. So how does that tie in with us as a gift? Well, you know, if we were to stay on the surface level, I could ask you something like, are you going to give Jesus a gift this season? What gift will you give Jesus? But that's not the question. The question is this. Do you know Christ well enough to give him the right gift? I'm not asking you what you're going to give him. Do you know him well enough to give him the right gift? Or is it going to be the spiritual version of a pair of socks? Do you know him well enough to give him the right gift? Wow, that's kind of a sobering question, almost presumptuous. How can I know God so well I know what I should give him? Well, it would be presumptuous unless God told us this. 1 Corinthians 2:11 and 12. For what person knows a man's thoughts except the spirit of the man which is in him? So also, no one comprehends the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. Now, we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is from him, that we might understand the gifts bestowed on us by God. See, we get gifts from God that allow us to then give gifts back to God. and to give actually the gift. And as we sat here, it was interesting in the first service we had, okay, in one word, what is that gift? What is the right gift? And it's one word. And of course, Steve raises his hand and says many, many words. So we picked on poor old Steve and we said, put it in one word, Steve. And then of course, it was very hard. But people threw out one-word things. They threw out all these things. And we all finally came down to this conclusion. The gift is yourself. The gift is yourself. Well, okay, that sounds good, but what exactly does that mean? How do you do that? How is you giving yourself as a gift? How does that work biblically? Not what you come up with, but biblically. How does that work? Well, let's put it into context a bit. Jesus is in the middle of a prayer, one of those prayers that's recorded word for word. In John 17:9 and 10, and he says something that really takes some reflection. He says, I pray for them. I do not pray for the world, but for those whom you have given me. For they are yours, and all mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I am glorified in them. There's a whole lot of giving going on there, isn't there? The Father gave to the Son gives back to the Father, and so on in this regard. And if you put it all together, it really comes down to this. You and I as gifts, we are God's gift to God, by God, in God's way. And it takes all of those things. As a gift, you are a gift from God to God in God's way. That's what's going on. But how does that work out? Well, I mean, what's that gift look like? What does it look like? If we did a New Testament survey and unwrapped to look what that gift, when you are the right gift for God, what does it look like? Well, to be the right gift, you must be transformed from the inside and the outside. To be the right gift, you must not simply be, but live like you are the sons and daughters of God. To be the right gift, we must value each other in the same way God values each of us. To be the right gift, we must lose ourselves, which means that we surrender our self-centeredness for God's greater vision. Boy, and that's a hard one even in churches. We surrender the self-centeredness for the greater vision God has. To be the right gift, you must live the reality that you are set aside for a holy purpose. And I hit them with that in the first service too. I said, what's that a definition for? To be set aside for a holy purpose is a direct definition of a theological word. Did you say something, Pam? There we go. There's one box of popcorn left for you. They won all the rest. There you go. Sanctified. Set aside for a holy purpose. Everyone who is in a relationship with the living God, with Christ, is sanctified, is set aside for a holy purpose. There is no exception. We live like we are set aside for holy purpose. To be the right gift, we are constantly in prayer. What does that mean, to be in prayer always? That we're praying all the time? No, it is more of the mindset that your mind and your heart are always open to what God is going to prompt you on. And it means one other thing too, because this word is always associated with prayer. It is a spirit of thankfulness. Very seldom when you look up prayer or being told to pray, especially in the New Testament, do you not find the word thankful in there somewhere? Thankful and open. That's what it means. So are we those things? Are we those things? Do you and I know God well enough to be the right gift? It's a simple question, but a really, really hard answer. A really hard answer. And of course, it's a question that goes way beyond the Christmas season. This gift to God. It's a lifetime thing, but you know what? The Christmas season isn't such a bad time to stop and really take stock and see how we're doing. Do you know Jesus Christ well enough to be the right gift? We're in the season of gift giving. And boy, everybody, the whole little series here is called Christmas Stressed to Christmas Blessed, right? And we know if you look at where stress comes from the most is probably from gift giving, right? I mean, just look at Black Friday. What an amazing thing that is, that people are literally giving their lives, getting killed, trying to get the best gift at a bargain. It's gotten really kind of out of whack. But you know what? Even if you manage that, and you, for your children and grandchildren and loved ones and all of that, manage to give the best material gift, we know that in time, that's going to fade from memory. In time, that gift itself will disappear. It will fade from existence itself. They're all temporal things. There's only one gift that's made of eternity. And that's you as the right gift given to the eternal God. That's the one gift that matters beyond anything else of all Christmases combined is, are you the right gift? Are you giving the right gift? Do you know Christ well enough to be the right gift? Do you know him well enough to be the right gift? I would propose to you or offer to you, encourage you for this Christmas season is that if you want to take a gift question or a gift focus, make that one your gift issue for the year, for the Christmas season. Do you know God well enough to be the right gift?